There's not a lot of understanding about the original. There's no like the day it happened. Like it's just like something that happened. But something pretty clear as far as
like a mural of it.
Exactly. Yeah. What is pretty clear is where the backstory of MS-13 comes from. The ghost of the story before they get to LA.
The pre-ghost.
Yes. The gang cell forms in Los Angeles in the 80s. Yes. But to talk about where it all truly starts, we have to talk about the El Salvadorian Civil War that breaks out in the 70s, peaking in 1979. And of all places, El Salvador. You wouldn't believe it.
I mean, it's so on the nose.
I thought it was just like an in joke, but it actually happens in El Salvador.
It's like the 8-day war or whatever. What war is that? No, the 10-year war? No, there's the 8-day war.
Yeah.
I think the 8-day war was in Israel. I don't know.
I don't know.
Yom Kippur War. I don't know.
They didn't make a movie about it. Why would I know?
Write a book about that, Isabel Allende, and then maybe I'll learn it.
As with most turmoil in Latin America, the Civil War has its root in the Spanish conquest, of course.
Okay.
Indigenous peoples and the mestizo.
This is where Zorro comes in. He covers all of Central.
And he's like the boogeyman, but he's a good guy, like Batman. Indigenous peoples and mestizos made up 95% of the population, and they were comprised the entire working class. And the last 5% of the population were all Spanish descent, all landowners who ruled everything, and they were referred to as the 14 families, quote unquote.
Okay.
Who together ruled El Salvador through military dictatorship. And in 1932, there was a labor leader named Agustin Farabundo Martí who led a peasant revolt against the 14 families, but it only lasted a few weeks before the military decimated the revolution along with a lot of civilians, like 30,000 people dead by the end of all this. This battle between classes persisted through the decades with upticks in violence through the 60s and 70s as right-wing paramilitary death squads, they eventually would join up with the El Salvador military. That's how right-wing they were.
Whenever there's a death squad involved, it's clear who's...
I think it's a joke later, but if your country has death squads and a liberation front, you're not doing okay.
Well, look at Russia. Just because the death squad is marching through the streets as we speak to kill their boss.
Yeah, exactly. To kill their boss. Something petty a boss would do, and then the death squad comes after you, but nothing's coming to my head.
Yeah, he cut down their 15-minute breaks to 10.
He asked me to stay over for 5 minutes just to clean up my area.
Could you work this Saturday? I need some death squatting done. That's it. Call the union.
So through the 70s...
The Soviet Union.
Thank you. So through the 60s and 70s, these right-wing paramilitary death squads and left-wing guerrilla forces would clash violently, like pretty much in the streets. In October of 1979, a group of politically moderate officers managed to oust the El Salvadorian dictator Carlos Humberto Romero, and together the moderates formed the Revolutionary Government Junta, or JRG. So the moderates were able to out one of the dictators.
That's great. Shocking.
It is shocking. Not shocking. 3 months later, in January of 1980, the right-wing psychos fought back against the JRG, and their violence included kidnapping, bombing a government newspaper, and murder. So the civilian leaders of JRG, of course, resigned.
Right.
That's what...
This is a little too extreme for me. I'm moderate.
We ousted a guy without killing anyone. This is going to last forever. Around the same time, the right-wing paramilitary death squads were rallying behind a right-wing extremist named Roberto de Abusian, or as they called him, Blowtorch Bob. How did he get...
That was Jim Carrey's alternate character.
How did he get that nickname? He got that nickname from how he got people to talk during interrogation sessions. He was behind the assassination of a human rights defender, Archbishop Oscar Romero, and he was the one who led the charge to dismantle the JRG. The death of Oscar Romero is pretty much the true start of the El Salvadoran Civil War, because not only did they assassinate him, this human rights defender, when they were having a memorial for him, snipers gathered and started shooting people in the crowd to memorialize Oscar Romero. 42 dead, over 200 wounded. God. In September of 1980, Blowtorch Bob founded the Nationalist Republican Alliance Party, which ARENA is what they call themselves, and was one of the key figures in the right-wing death squads. In response to that, the 5 big leftist revolutionary groups merged together to form the FMLN. Farabundo Martí, who was the guy who led the peasant revolt, the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, FMLN.
FMNLN?
Yeah, no.
Wait, FMN... Whoa, is it not in English?
Yeah, but also I don't think they count the last F.
Oh.
If you're, like I said, if your country has a liberation front, you're not doing okay. This was a guerrilla force put together to stop the government and right-wing paramilitary groups. This is only a brief summary of the El Salvadoran Civil War, obviously. And if you want to read more, reading about it was incredible.
Listen to our bonus episode.
Yeah, where I sat down and read 3 books on the El Salvadoran Civil War. Incredibly scary. incredibly interesting. So if you're interested, I got this information from the Center for Justice and Accountability's website, but there's many, many books out there.
Again, if your information is on the Center for Accountability and Justice, not going well.
Didn't go good. All of what I just said to say that throughout the 80s, the Civil War put the country into a violent death spiral. It's estimated that 75,000 El Salvadorians were killed by massacres, executions, landmines, and indiscriminate bombings.
And El Salvador is pretty small, isn't it?
I think it is.
I don't know what the population is, but that's...
I don't know either, but it sounds like the entire country was just like fighting. Civilians caught up in the storm could be tortured, mutilated, sexually assaulted, or just plain old killed. With no end in sight to the violence, many El Salvadorians looked to escape. And because I read this somewhere, I don't know how true this was, that because of the El Salvadorian alliance with the U.S. during the Cold War, America just seemed like a place to go to, like a flea, but I don't know how accurate that is. The relations between the U.S. and El Salvador's government kind of confused me because while Reagan seemed to think Blowtorch Bob and these paramilitary death squads were psychos and publicly condemned them, I read a research article that said that the U.S. backed the Salvadorian military who was trying to defeat the revolutionary groups who were trying to oust the dictator. And, they basically, the U.S. was indiscriminately targeted anybody suspected of belonging to any of these leftist guerrilla groups.
To bring it back to Fantasia, like I keep thinking about the Sorcerer's Apprentice. I keep thinking about Mickey Mouse.
Little Mickey Mouse.
But like the meaning of the Sorcerer's Apprentice thing of like, this guy, he's a mouse, but he knew a little bit of how to try to get the job done quicker so that things would be easier for him, but he couldn't control it. Yeah. And like, I guess this is like a common saying in Germany in terms of like politics and stuff of like, you made the broom. I don't think they say this, but like you made the broom try to do the work for you. And then the broom got out of your control. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's pretty much the U.S.
It's a golem all over again.
It's a golem. The U.S. trying to mingle in their own agenda into Central American politics. And then like,
we are Mickey Mouse.
And after all, we're the Mickey Mouse.
Pleased to meet you. Have you guessed my name? It's Mickey Mouse.
We're going to need a bomb at Children's Hospital just so they know we're serious. Knowing the U.S. during any period of time, probably both are true. The president couldn't condemn a psycho leader and then turn around and then back the government that's trying to kill the guerrilla group to get rid of the dictator.
Yeah. No, not Reagan.
Not Reagan.
Not the Gipper. He would never.
He was an actor. Would an actor do that?
Would an actor be double-handed? Is that a phrase?
He liked jelly beans. You think he could do that? About 1 million Salvadorians left their home to neighboring countries.
God, 1 million people.
1 million people left. With the Reagan-era asylum policies in place, any refugees fleeing were routinely denied refugee status and forced to live under the radar. So if you came to, you had to like anybody who comes into this country illegally, you kind of have to like not get in trouble and live very quietly and just hope that you can...
So were they were
denied.
They were denied,
status.
But they came in.
They came in anyways.
Right,
yeah.
So yeah.
If they successfully got into the U.S., they would settle into impoverished neighborhoods with no recreational facilities or resources, but full of gangs and crime.
Right.
Not 100% of the time, but it feels like most of the time.
No, you said 100% of the time. This is how you feel about immigrants. I know.
It's black and white with you. It's either yes or
quite
no.
literally.
Quite literally. Yeah.
But both of our stories, I don't know, like we haven't spent years studying the history of these gangs. Even the amount of research in the few weeks that we've done, it's so clear who is really responsible for this. And it's always the government, the United States government is responsible for what's going on. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't
small scale and big scale.
I don't
like local government and the big government.
Right. And I don't get like, why don't people see this? Like, why don't people get what the real problem is?
That's a very smart question.
We're not smart.
We're not smart. I only read for 2 days and I'm over here saying it like I know it. Like
I know how to reunite El Salvador.
I think I figured it out. Have they tried a Pepsi commercial or Kendall Jenner, hence a paramilitary death squad Coke?
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Did they try singing Imagine?
So about half that million Salvadorans fleeing came to the U.S. and a small percentage of the people who came to Los Angeles, a very small percentage of those people were trained in guerrilla warfare and the use of military weapons because they were part of the leftist military groups or revolutionary groups. It sounds like I'm saying refugees are violent and we let bad people in. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, it really does.
Allowing refugees to come here and escape not being slaughtered in their homeland is a good thing. I like that America does that.
Whoa.
reading about the atrocities in El Salvador really rattled me, especially because it sounds like, is that what's happening here now with all these neo-Nazi groups breaking up these pride celebrations? Is that like the first little inkling of like, oh my, mean,
again, if you read 3 weeks of history like I did,
you start
see
getting
the
a little
signs.
sweaty.
Yeah.
It's weird how you get sweaty all of a sudden. And it would be cruel, like I was saying, it would be cruel not to let these refugees in because they're escaping like a really violent death.
Right. Where else are they going to go?
Yeah.
As with all of this stuff, where else are you going to go?
Where else are you going to go? Yeah. You have to go somewhere. Like you can't, like when staying is no longer an option. I'm sure like the last resort was leaving. I'm sure like they're hoping anything. Who leaves on the first sign of trouble?
Me, but who wants to leave their country?
Yeah.
I mean, me. But.
And come to a country where you don't speak the language, you know barely anybody, you have no resources on your own. Like you come on basically on your knees, and then you're going to be like, no thanks. But with that, when we do lose a certain amount of control when people come here. Yeah, that's a given.
That's what people are afraid of.
Yeah, that's what people are afraid of. And in that small space, that's where MS-13 is born.
Right.
So like I was saying, there was a huge Salvadorian migration to Los Angeles in the 80s due to the Civil War. And they searched and found Spanish-speaking neighborhoods like East LA or Pico Union or MacArthur Park to kind of get a foothold. Oh, they speak Spanish. I speak like Spanish too.
I speak a type of Spanish as well.
A type of Spanish as well, yeah. But of course, there is racism among the Latin American countries and cultures, and some Mexican gangs, like the Mexican Mafia, weren't keen on this wave of Salvadorians coming in, and these new Salvadorians coming to LA were met with prejudice and violence. So to protect themselves against these established Mexican gangs, these refugees now living in LA started forming together. At first, it began kind of quote unquote innocently as a stoner gang into heavy metal, which is pretty innocent. But then they're also committing.
Oh, really? Like they would just do drugs and listen to like this is how it starts. This is what I've always said.
I've always said this. Randy Rhoads, getting into Ronnie James Dio is a start. Yeah, they were just like stoners who would listen to heavy metal. No problem with that. I know people like that.
It's a problem with me.
All of it, rock and roll, and then committing like low level crimes just to get by. They were going by MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha stoners with 13 tacked on at the end. Either 13 is a bad luck number so they know we're bad luck, or the 13th letter of the alphabet is M for marijuana. One of those two. Read both.
It was almost 69. MS-69.
Imagine like...
Are they related to MS-DOS? Is that a rival?
Don't mess with MS-DOS. Oh. Don't mess with them. If you see them cross the street...
They'll delete all your files if you do the wrong thing.
Imagine MS-13 rolled up on you and they thought you were spraying them out. Like, no, I just put DOS. It's a joke. It's a computer joke, and then they just cut you to pieces.
So, what is Mara Salvatrucha?
I think the translation was something like Streetwise Gang.
Okay.
I read somewhere that they also took it from like a John Wayne movie, but I didn't read too much about it because it sounded fake.
Yeah.
I believe like in Spanish, it just roughly translates to Street Smart Gang.
You know, I don't entirely dismiss the John Wayne thing because there's a part, one of the things in my story that I read where they're also like, oh, these are movie fans?
Yeah. They have hard takes on Fellini.
Were they there when I went to see Fantasia? I mean, the theater was red.
All gangs stop Oscar night? All gang
temporary truth.
Temporary truth.
I want to see who gets slapped.
I want to see if Parasite wins. It said
Moonlight.
It said that when this stoner heavy metal gang started committing crimes, they had so little money that they couldn't afford a gun, so they brought with them machetes. This would become part of their insane myth as to why they still use machetes.
Okay, yeah, that's one of the things I learned is that machetes are their weapon of choice.
Yes.
Which is so scary.
Yeah. I've used a machete for weeds, and I thought I can murder a whole family with this.
You're chopping weeds with a machete.
Yeah, the weed whacker the wire, I don't get it.
I guess it's not that weird because when I clean the rain gutters, I use a battle axe. I like to use my halberd.
I use an AR-15 to clean the drain in the sink. It's a tool. Like a car or a hammer.
When my kitchen gets clogged, I just use a good old-fashioned cat o' nine tails. It gets it cleared right up.
My girlfriend needs a massage. I get a blackjack. They would, back when they were a stoner gang, would hold the gang's meetings and rites in a cemetery, which goes to show you how into metal they were. And one of the early members of the gang I was reading about, his name was Ozzy, and he was named after Ozzy Osbourne. Or his gang name comes from Ozzy Osbourne.
So just to be clear, these are like teenage kids.
Mm-hmm, teenage kids in like late 80s, I guess.
They sound like American kids.
Yeah, they sound like American kids.
Not to cast any aspersions, but like these sound like kids who grew up in America.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out. It sounds a little bit like they were young kids brought here, spent a few years, they found like a group of people and then like slowly have started evolving into a gang. I don't know.
It sounds like these are just kids we would know.
Because
like we would know kids who are not like this also.
Yeah, also like that. Yeah, but I don't know. I was trying to read about like what are the early days like, and there are books out there, but I just couldn't get my hands on any. But it sounds like when they came here, they were just trying to adapt at first, and they're like, it's really hard. Nobody likes us, not even like neighborhood guides, because they're Mexican, don't like El Salvadorians.
Right.
So now like I just hang out with other Salvadorians and we do heavy metal. Okay. And then like it slowly starts to grow from there.
Okay. I want to hear when this flip happens.
By the late 80s, it seemed like MS-13.
And it better be a kick flip.
By the late 80s, it seemed like MS-13 in LA was already branching into cliques based on area. I know for sure there was the Coronado Little Psycho clique, which was 2 blocks from MacArthur Park along South Coronado Street. Some of the members of the first incarnation of MS-13 are now actively running different...
Let me check my notes.
Yeah, let me check. I put 13. MS, because I heard people say MS, and we know that means MS-13. I just want to make it clear here that I'm talking about MS-13. They're people who were little kids in the 80s are now running full cliques in other countries now. One of the members of the Hollywood Locals clique joined when he was 13, and like a lot of guys from MS-13 during Clinton's era, I'll get into this more later, but if you got arrested, then you got deported. So established gang members like Diabolito would end up back in El Salvador and ready to continue growing the gang. Because he was a gang member here. He goes back. MS-13 is now back in El Salvador, I guess. And then you just like rise the ranks.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, you go to prison for minor crimes. And because so many gang members were locked up, you came out of prison a well-informed, hardened criminal, more savvy and ruthless than when you came in. And also arrests leading to deportations didn't just happen to MS-13. 18th Street, which is an LA gang named after a street in Los Angeles, is now a criminal entity in far-off countries, still being called 18th Street, which is a street in Los Angeles, which is wild to me. I don't know why that's so strange, but like that you can go to another country and like, oh no, 18th Street is here. Like, they followed me? Oh no, they've been here.
It's like the smorgasburg, which I'll take any chance to point out, doesn't make sense in Los Angeles why it's called smorgasburg. Like the meaning has been lost.
Yeah. It's just like name recognition at this point.
Yeah. It's a brand name.
Yeah. Like MS-13, it's a brand name.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's hard to map when they went from being a gang of stoners to a street gang. And some people say it was the 1985 murder of one of their guys that forced them to escalate to protect themselves. Some people think that was maybe the introduction of crack to LA that created an opportunity to expand their operations.
I'll get into my people might be a little responsible for that.
Was the CIA flying planes in to help them get that stuff across to?
Yeah, those are my people, the CIA.
Yeah, the CIA was my people. Probably a mixture of both. Probably a mixture of like, they were getting hit, so they need to protect themselves, so they start to escalate. Now they're all carrying guns. Now they're all ready to go to war at any given moment. And also the introduction of crack probably also happened around the same time, because when crack happens, violence, like there's a upshoot in violence and gang activity when crack hits the streets. And as more refugees kept fleeing the civil war in El Salvador, they came to LA and found a group of street toughs waiting to build their numbers up. And these later refugees were more exposed to horrors of war since they stayed longer. And some of them, initially you'd come here, you had to form MS-13. Now you came here, MS-13 was already here waiting for you. And you just came from a civil war where you saw a bunch of crazy stuff. And now there's a group waiting for you. And so you just sorted yourself out, and you can be pretty quick to violence because you were just shooting paramilitary death squads or whatever side you want to pick.
This makes sense to you.
Yeah. So according to a report, I read this and I thought it was pretty interesting. A gang develops in waves or generations. The first generation of a gang pulls small opportunistic crimes and goes at it with rival gangs. As time goes on, the second generation of the gang have more structure, they're more organized, and usually assume a market like drugs or guns. By this point, a gang would operate with farther reach, but still take orders from a centralized source. By the third generation, the kinks of the organization have been worked out, goals of power have been established, and maybe at this point you have enough social equity or money, probably both, to have friends in high places. Like you could pay off the cops or lawyers or judges or politicians. Like you might be able to actually have pool in the streets. They also...
If you all want to stop and watch The Wire, I think it would help a lot for both of our stories to make sense.
Let's stop this right now and watch The Wire, and then we'll kind of reconvene.
Just the first 3 seasons.
Okay, just the first 3 seasons of The Wire. Every episode's 3 hours. Also, third generation gangs operate on a global scale, and we'll see this with incarnations of MS-13. At the beginning of their career in crime, MS-13 didn't really have much of a product or service. They were more consumers of crime. I mean, they would smoke pot, or they were, by most accounts, just stick-up kids. They would allow access to their neighborhood in exchange for money, or they would collect for other dealers. They decided if they're going to truly evolve and escalate, they needed help. And because the prison system in California is predominantly Mexican mafia, they were able to build an alliance, which is how they joined up with 18th Street or 18. There was Pinko Union gang that starts in the 60s who were linked with the Mexican mafia. Now MS-13 is within their realm. There's an alliance going on so they can be an arm of the Mexican mafia.
Okay.
I'm not sure why, but after the influx of Salvadorian refugees, MS-13, I think what happened was as more refugees started coming in and finding MS-13, they were able to now be strong enough to hold their own. And so they split off from 18th Street, thus creating a tense rivalry that goes on to this day. Like now MS-13 and 18th Street are
an independent enterprise.
And thank you
MS-13 LLC.
Yeah, LLC. Thank you for the help, but now we're enemies. MS then found another partner in another MS, Mexican Sureños. This alliance they formed cost MS-13 $5,000 and 5 weapons. And now they have a stronger alliance with a Mexican gang.
5 weapons?
5 weapons. I
gave them... There's so much weird symbolism in gangs.
Yeah, it's their own little cult, you know? Their own little drink the Kool-Aid. More attention, speaking of MacArthur Park, where Mr. Jim Jones got arrested for soliciting sex from a cop at the Westlake Theater right there in MacArthur Park. More attention during the 90s through 2000s concentrates on MS-13 in Central America. But here in Los Angeles, the MS-13 remained a very real gang, albeit operating with less influence and more scattered. They are more like an overarching federation of regional cliques working under the same heading.
The hierarchy, the like organization of gangs is so confusing to me.
Yeah.
I need like the presentation booklets they print out at like a board meeting. Like I need one of these of gangs and say like, oh, interesting structure.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's interesting. So they have runners.
But we're going to have to lay off 30% of the employees.
There's just a bunch of body bags on the ground. Yeah. We need to lay off.
Fill these
up. Like, I'm sure the same thing with you. There wasn't a single resource that listed all the insanely awful crimes that MS-13 has done. But through summaries.
I'm sure there's like an FBI office somewhere oh, so this is the Corleone family.
Oh, cool. On a street level, these men are responsible for drug smuggling, human trafficking, prostitution, extortion, assault, and murder. Sometimes these murders are seen as random, but actually they're initiations into MS-13, shootings either up close or drive-bys. Other times they are retribution hits, which are awful. And the more I read, the more I hear about machete slayings, which are insane. People getting hacked to death.
Well, what scares me about MS-13, because other gangs, at least the Crips and the Bloods, don't, I mean, except for like minor robberies and stuff like that, like if you are not a Crip or a Blood, unless you're like, going up and like, well, what do we have here? Like you're not
my pockets are so full of money right now.
Yeah, you're not going to be killed by purposely by a Crip or a Blood. But what scares me about MS-13 is that doesn't seem to be the case. Like they will kill people who have
I think
nothing to do with any gang. Civilian people. It seems like they will kill civilian people. Not just, I mean, I don't really know, just based on the story. Sometimes it sounds like mostly the retribution, but also it sounds like, you just got picked. And it also doesn't... Like an initiation thing, like kill... This is something that Melissa looked up of like, go to this place, pick a person, and kill this person. I feel like when it's retribution, you get shot. I feel like... No, sorry. When it's initiation, you get shot. When it's retribution, you get cut up and left in Angeles National Forest. If you're a rat, you get probably the worst. Retribution and being a rat, it's the same thing. But there's a lot of scary things about MS-13. But while other gangs are sort of confined by, it seems like county limits to a certain extent, MS-13 is what's called... It's first of all, they're called a terrorist group online, but also they're called a transnational gang. Meaning not only does MS-13 exist in almost every U.S. state now, a far-reaching, like every state almost has a MS-13 cutting people up. They've gone international. They also, they exist in other countries. During the Clinton era, when, like I was saying, when gang violence was at a high, he enacted a policy that would fast-track deportations in order to cut down on gang violence. What this did by sending gang members out of the U.S. and back to their countries of origin was spread the influence of MS-13. Like it was just like, okay, this whole little gang needs to go to wherever, and they went to another country and just did MS-13 stuff. So just to reiterate a basic summary, basically the U.S. backed the reason El Salvadorians fled El Salvador. Once they were here, our impoverished cities were a breeding ground for gang violence, and once they were matured as a group, as a gang, we exported them back as a fully realized gang, and they became a criminal organization. Gang. Yeah, and we re-gifted them. Yeah, and quite suddenly, MS-13 became a global problem in Central America, in particular. El Salvador now has a deeply rooted problem with what is now seen as a terrorist group, and they're like a huge problem in the neighboring countries too, what is Honduras and Guatemala. I wonder though how much of the like what we hear, these horrific incidents, I wonder how much of that is that they want us to think that.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, especially because they don't...
Because there's a lot of bad rumors about me flying around.
Sure.
And I just want you to think that.
Yeah. That's just part of the trick. That's part of the charm.
Yeah,
you don't know what's true.
This is the prestige, Greg.
This is the prestige. They're almost like a formless entity as well. It reminds me of like when we were talking about the Black Hand, where there was the official Black Hand organization, and then there was people far away from the source who were claiming to be Black Hand just to scare the hell out of
Right.
people. And then nobody actually had... No one can question you. No one could be like, prove that you're in the Black Hand. Like, prove you're an MS-13. You have a machete. You can buy that at Home Depot.
That's not a machete.
Yeah.
That's a rapier.
It's a Sith, and then you get cut up.
Sith?
What is it called? Scythe.
Revenge of the Scythe?
Revenge of the Scythe, yeah. You know, I've been reading about a lot of the leaders getting arrested by the FBI, and they were like huge. They got arrested for racketeering or extortion or trafficking. And you're like, that gang did that? But then like there's the gang, the global problem. Then like on our streets in LA in the Valley, like, oh, just like the little like, they're going to cut me up. Yeah. They're going to shoot me.
Yeah.
And both are true. Both are probably to an extent.
I can be afraid of all of this, Greg.
Oh, and I am now.
Nothing scares me more than racketeering.
I had to look that up. I'm like, what the hell is racketeering?
Well, have you ever read Judy Blume's version of The Racketeer?
Not a lot of answers for what I was looking for.
Are you there, America? It's me, the Racketeer.
2 LA cliques that are getting a lot of attention right now are the Hollywood clique, whose leaders Nelson Alexander Flores or Mula and Jason Wilfredo Ayala Alcantara, the Indio de Hollywood, were both arrested by the FBI recently. That's one clique. The other one that's getting a lot of attention, I dedicated a lot of reading to because you kind of clued me in on it, was the Fulton clique, which claims parts of North Hollywood, Panorama City, and Van Nuys.
Yeah.
There's been a string of attacks and murders thanks to the Fulton clique.
Great.
According to the LA Times, members of the MS-13 lured people to remote locations and attacked them. These people were accused of transgressions against the gang. LAPD claims that many of these attacks were part of the induction process for new recruits. They lured a 16-year-old to a canyon and beat him to death in 2017. One guy crossed out the graffiti and they abducted him, dragged him to the Angeles National Forest, and cut him apart with machetes. One of the members allegedly cut out his heart, which is a thing I keep reading. Later, because of another thing, they took people out to Angeles National Forest and killed them using machetes, knives, and baseball bats. Another person was killed in the Malibu Hills. They shot a homeless guy in Whitsett Field in North Hollywood.
That's the park I was telling you about.
They shot a homeless guy, 37-year-old homeless guy.
Right next door to the library.
That's right. In 2017, 2 girls used Facebook to lure Brian and Dino out to Lake Balboa. The girls were hooked up with MS-13, and once Brian was there, the MS-13 rolled up and beat and stabbed him to death. He was 16. That might have been the story from, but then...
So, they're I'm trying to look for comfort here. They think that there was a reason that these people were targeted. It wasn't just a random thing.
They weren't random. They're usually, from what I understand, if you get hit with a machete, you've already done something so awful to them that they're going to F you up.
Yeah.
If it's just like they want to get an issue, they'd probably shoot you.
So when you're kidnapped by MS-13, you want to look for a gun to be brought out.
Yeah. They didn't want the ocean for 8 days, counting every oxygen. They blew up. They imploded.
Right.
This is that situation.
It wasn't a slow death. It was a horrific death.
It was a horrific, but it was over in 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Balboa Park, by the way.
Don't go there.
Don't go there. Don't go there. It's mine.
Yeah.
There's so many things that I think, because one time we went walking around Balboa Park, like the really kind of reedy, like weedy area, the reedy weedies.
Yeah.
And there was clearly a body had just been found because there was like police cars and like areas roped off, and we found nothing about it, which must mean this probably happens weekly. That like a body shows up in Balboa Park.
Yeah, Balboa Park.
Balboa Park. Ride the duck boat.
Ride the duck thing. Someone who was believed to be from a rival gang crossed out MS-13 graffiti and was abducted by 4 members at the LA River entrance in North Hollywood, then driven to, once again, Angeles National Forest.
Wouldn't they have like a park pass or something?
We did an episode. I wanted to go out there. Now I'm like, I don't know if I want to go out there
I know
anymore.
a way you can go out there.
Yeah.
I saw this graffiti on the wall in North Hollywood.
Just go ahead and cross it out and you get a
one free trip to Los Angeles National Forest.
So they took him out there and they killed him with a machete, and once again said they carved his heart out before flinging his body parts into the canyon. One woman who was thought to be a police informant was beaten to death with a baseball bat, rolled up in a carpet, and dumped along Angeles Crest Highway. She'd also been stabbed and struck to the head with a heavy-edged weapon, as well as strangled, tied up, and her mouth was duct tape over. Another person they thought was a rat was killed, transported in his own car to Legion Park. They dumped his body, and then once his body was out, they pelted his corpse with rocks before leaving there. Detectives found his ankles and wrists tied with shoelaces, his shorts pulled down below his knees. His head had been destroyed with a baseball bat.
Okay, so before we started recording, we were talking about like specific crimes.
Yeah.
And I was saying how I couldn't find that many, and you were like, yeah, me neither. And I didn't want to get too gruesome. So this is your version of not too gruesome.
I'm sorry. This is pretty gruesome. We should have probably had a trigger warning. But also, I wanted more. I didn't say too gruesome. I had gruesome facts. None of it makes any sense to me because they were all like written in a summary of like, and they arrested one MS-13 member, and then they listed every awful thing I've read. Some experts are saying that the increase in violence from MS-13 is them exerting dominance over the other gangs, trying to show how ruthless they are. New recruits are young, teenagers from area high schools or recently immigrated to this country. Although their numbers are dwindling over the past years, LAPD still says they're a huge threat. Closer to the city center, it said MS-13 runs MacArthur Park. They go around extorting money off of people for protection, quote unquote, and taxing any criminal activity that goes to the park. If you want to sell drugs or anything, you get taxed by MS-13. Same thing with prostitution, gambling. They said food, and I'm like, do food vendors get taxed by MS-13? Probably.
I've heard like racist people who don't want food vendors are like, but they're just working for the gangs. I'm sure not by choice.
Not by choice.
The ones that are,
unfortunately,
I'm sure
they're working for a gang, but they're getting taxed by gangs, not they're working for gangs. They're not selling heroin out of their food
Follow
carts.
the money. Yeah, you know
just
what?
Giving them $40 at the end of the night.
Have you ever tried a heroin wrapped hot dog right outside of Staples Center with some peppers?
Makes me super sleepy. Homeless people at the park pay rent to the MS-13. They apparently walk up to people in the park and charge $80 to spend any time at the park. Very recently, there's been attacks on transgender people there at the park. So MacArthur Park, watch out. One of the buildings is off a Rampart. They hold up and party in abandoned buildings that developers bought and kicked residents out of and then did nothing with. These buildings, they called them destroyers. And inside these destroyers, MS-13 members sleep, party, peddle drugs, kill people. These destroyers have been found in Westlake, Pico Union, and parts of Koreatown and East Hollywood. The destroyers are...
I want addresses.
Yeah, me too. I want to drive by a building and be like, don't ever go there. If you get driven here, you're not doing great. Eat the cyanide tooth. Why you got it made.
That's what it's there for.
That's what it's there for. These destroyers are incubators for MS-13 gang life. There's a really great article by Matthew Ormsworth called A Place to Sleep, Party, and Kill. Abandoned LA Buildings Become MS-13 Gang Destroyers, if you want to read more. And as the article points out, this gang is now transnational, has a reputation that Trump and other Republicans can use to further their own agenda. But here in LA, a lot of them are just made up of homeless and disaffected youth. Like they aren't criminal. They really don't have much to do with a criminal organization extorting money in Honduras. They're just like, we're here and we have this is our gang life. These are the people like I have no home. None of my family doesn't love me. And this is what I want. These are my people. I just want to get high and commit crimes all day.
Sounds nice.
No job sounds nice. Their gang sign is still devil horns, linking way back to the heavy metal music, listening to their roots.
So they're like they're the guy from Stranger Things.
They're
wearing the
Eddie or whatever. Yeah, they're wearing the leather jacket. They got the horns. By 2012, MS-13 has spread into 42 U.S. states, and with around 10,000 members in the U.S. And although the numbers seem lower every year, the level of violent attacks seem to be on the rise, which means like the less people in the gang there are, the more violent they're required to be.
Okay, that's the end of your story.
That's the end of my story.
Great. And they're here right now.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce